Namaskar.
Krishna, I think last time when we left, um, you had made a very important point. Two concepts you introduced, which provide a window into why Srimad Acharya founded his philosophy and why it is remarkably different from others, particularly Advaita. The two concepts in my mind were, path-breaking concepts in my mind were, introducing Sakshi as some kind of a touchstone, as it were, a natural, spontaneous touchstone which does not require any other additional validation. And that is a very important point. It is positive in some ways and negative in some ways. I will come to that. Why I feel it negative, I'll come to that. And another concept is particularly in the theory of errors, this Abhinava-anyatha-khyathi is also is very interesting because it kind of tries to bridge, as it were, when you mistake something for something else, the entire psychological cognitive process of mistaking and then validating and analyzing what happened to that erroneous understanding. How do we deal with it? And do we dismiss off our fancy? But we cannot, because during the pendency of this mistaken perception, all our reactions are very genuine and real. And so you cannot dismiss it off as a fancy of the mind. So there are several complicated things around it. So though you did not say it, I continue to harp on this theme because I have personally very much interest in finding out what exactly was the departure point of our Srimad Acharya in the Ishtasiddhi context. I keep talking about it all the time. It's very fascinating to me because if somebody depart, there has to be a push. Nobody goes away just like that, right? There's a push. And what is a push? I think we need to understand is my quest. Let us see how it goes. My current understanding, obviously it will change as time goes, is that Srimad Acharya was not a great fan of, particularly when it comes to matters of perception and errors of perception, treating something as Abhinava-anyatha-khyathi, as something I cannot explain, forget about it kind of approach. He didn't like it, is the way I treat it. In which case, it is incumbent on him. It is his responsibility. Srimad Anandatirtha Muni's responsibility to provide a valid explanation on the errors in perception. I mean, you cannot simply say you're wrong to everybody without saying what is wrong. In which case, Abhinava-anyatha-khyathi, if that is his concept which he's supporting, he has to explain in great detail, which I find is kind of a gap in his thing. The only reference I could, of course, that's why I said I'm not a great scholar. Kindly correct me here. Talk to your gurus and correct me here. The only reference I could get was in Vishnu Tattva Vinarnaya, where he says that asataha satya pratitihi sato asatya pratiti itya anyatya pratiti eva Prantitvad. That's all it tells. That is, illusion consists in unreal or non-existent object or relation being presented in immediate perception as real and existing, real and existing, and of really existing object or relation as non-existing. And nothing else I'm able to say. If that is a departure point for him, it's so important to explain further. I don't know why he chose not to explain further. And maybe he does elsewhere, which is I would request you to talk about it. And some kind of a difference I see in bits and pieces I've read Nyaya Sudha, where interestingly Shri.Jayatheertharu brings the Sakshi concept as a defense. His argument seems to be in his statement Avsargikam, Jnananam, etc. He argues this Antakarana Vrittinam Yathartham Swayamehe Granati Parikshasa Kritastu. That means he says that real knowledge, real experience is self-evident. Only errors need to be explained, and if a little bit of analysis, Swayameva Kritastu, when you do that, automatically it manifests because of, isn't it? Yathartham Swayamehe Granati is what he's trying to say. In other words, he seems to argue, correct me if I'm wrong, he seems to argue that the Sakshi would tell you where you're wrong. If it tells it is not wrong, it is not wrong, seems to be his argument. Coming from a great dialectical expert like him, this seems to be axiomatic. I don't know why he went axiomatic in this. There has to be a proper defense. Because the problem is, Sakshi is not some validated third-party thing, instrument, right? Validity, Sakshi is also in us. It's our instrument, internal to us. The confusion also internal to us. Right? Error is internal to us. So you're trying to say somehow in a terribly confused state, mistaking kind of environment, all our instruments internal to us put together put us in a wrong understanding, in error and perception. Somehow magically, Sakshi tells you, oh, no, this is not correct, this is correct, and you have to accept it. That is very, in my view, is very fanciful and axiomatic. I mean, to put it very respectfully. Yeah, I find neither Srimad Anandatirtha Muni chose to explain properly, nor the great logician Jayatheertharu chose to explain in a logical way. That I find is a weakness in the whole argument. And if you say the entire edifice of Tattvavada stands on the fulcrum of Sakshi, and if it is axiomatic, then we have a big problem going forward. So this is my initial thoughts. I would let you explain, where I'm going wrong and things like that, and continue your path. I don't know whether it's kind of a little sidestepping your train of thoughts, but I thought I'll put it out because it's important for readers to understand this very, very important point. So I leave it here now.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om. Narasimha Akhilajnana Matadhvanta Divakaraha Jayatyamita Sukha Shakti Payonidhihi Abhramam Bhangarahitam Ajadam Vimalam Sada Anandatirthamatulam Bhaje Tapatrayapaham Apadamodi Paryantam Gurunam Akritim Smaret Tena Vignaha Pranashyante Siddhyanti Cha Manorathaha. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om. So thanks for your questions, sir. So, I mean, before I again present my slides, my topic that what I prepared today was very similar, or it's in the same lines as whatever you just mentioned. I thought we will talk about this notion of Pramanya Swatastva, Pramanya Paratastva, and so on and so forth. If I introduce those terms, you are likely to get confused, or you may think that there is something very technical over there. So I will try to put it in a layman's this thing. I will try to explain the Tattvavada stance on that, and then we can understand what Shri.Jayatheertharu mentioned. So before we go further, let's try to recollect what we told in the last few classes or few sessions that we had. So one is basically when we said Sakshi is the main the validator or the apperceiver of any knowledge, right? It is, are we just, as you mentioned, right? Is it just we are positing something, we are postulating something, or we are just saying that, it is, we are just taking a stance without defending that. Is it something like that or not, is something that we will see now. What we have seen earlier is that the fundamental consciousness, whatever you say as I, right? We said that is self-referential, and there are certain pieces of knowledge, certain knowledge, prameyas, which are perceived by this consciousness or this self. So that includes time, because time is perceived or it is comprehended, cognized even in deep sleep, even in sushupti. When I say, I slept, the posterior judgment, of course, is that, I slept for so long and I was happy and it took so much time, kind of thing, right? So there is a perception of time, there is perception of self, and then there is perception of bliss also. So based on this, we said that there are some things that the consciousness itself understands. One important thing which we also mentioned, I mean, see, this is all, we have not taken anything about, we have not told anything about Tattvavada so far. I have not tried to bring in any Veda or any scripture so far to mention this. This is all based on our universal experience, where we are saying that a simple analysis or a good analysis of our universal experience will leave us with a fact that I mean, we cannot not accept it, which is that you have something called as you do cognize yourself. There is self-referential knowledge, and whatever it construes as valid is not cannot be undone. It cannot be corrected later or anything like that. There may be many other things that we correct later. For example, I may see a rope as a snake, and I may get correction thing like I may correct it later. So while the actual object of in the external world is something that we may correct later, one thing which is beyond any questionable, reasonable question or reasonable doubt is that there is an external world, because it is cognized by Sakshi itself. And we also saw that there are different means of knowledge. One is pratyaksha, and another one is let me share my screen. I think it will be easier that way.
Sure.
Is this visible now?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sure. So we mentioned that there are these different indriyas, which communicate or which convey this knowledge. They produce the knowledge, and manas is the first point of interception, or the first receptor, so to speak. And there is some sort of change within the manas itself. This consciousness just reflects that. It understands that without undergoing any intrinsic change by itself. Unlike other feelings like happiness or sadness, wherein there is some amount of perceptible change even within the consciousness. And if you extend this thing a little further, basically there are these different sources of knowledge, Pramana, that's what we call it here, and they all produce some or the other knowledge which is cognized by the jiva or the consciousness itself. This is the model with which we are working, and we will come to the word term kevala pramana later if need be. Okay, so after that we saw that there is a theory of error. So it is not just to correct you on one point, or I mean, at least I have a different opinion there. See, Acharya is not trying to just depart or anything like that. Only once you accept that something is the standard, then only you talk about departure. He tried to uphold. I mean, as a what do you call, follower of him, this is what I will say, that he basically mentioned whatever the Pramanas told. Other people have departed, or they went away. They went in a different direction, right? So he tried to basically show that his thesis or his theory or Tattva is something that is inescapable if you accept the basic pramanas. And so his entire and when you even before that also, right, when you talked about Sankhya, yoga and all those things, you were trying to put them as some model of explanation. Whereas the traditional way of looking at them is, they are all different schools of thought. Each school of thought has something called as an epistemology and an ontology and, other things. So epistemology is basically your study of knowledge and its sources, validity, when it becomes invalid and so on and so forth. Ontology is, what are all the different entities in my system? How do we classify them? How do they behave? Whatever, if you remember, we used to have some sort of system design kind of thing, right? That we used to do. It is not exactly that, but you can appreciate an ontology if you understand that. Now, every school basically says that, okay, this is my epistemology and this is my ontology. And they try to prove or justify their own epistemology or ontology based on, again, same thing, which is universal experience. You cannot what do you call, produce something in the air which does not have a pramana. So in fact, all Bharatiya darshanas are distinct from the West in this particular matter because of this very reason. We can have lots of theories, a priori, a posteriori, all those things are good, but where is the pramana? If you ask that question, it is better answered in the Bharatiya darshanas. So whether it be Sankhya's cognitive model that you are saying is simply because they perceive, they have their epistemology says that Prakriti is the main force, or their ontology says that Prakriti is the main force. They try to say that this is derived from certain inferences, and so on and so forth. Nyaya school also has its own ontology and epistemology, so on and so forth with other schools. Now, what we were looking at is that when it comes to one particular topic within epistemology, which is their theory of error, there are these 5 theories that we talked about in the last this one. Right? You are able to see my screens, right?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So there are these 5 theories of error. So when I say error, basically there is erroneous knowledge that we are talking about. Prabhakara says that, so for example, the first cognition is that there is a seashell that somebody mistook as silver, and they tried to pick it up, and so on and so forth. So all these analyses, let's say, are on this particular example. A Prabhakara says no erroneous cognition, there are 2 pieces of knowledge, and so on and so forth. Nyaya says there are 3 parts to this here. This is silver. There is thisness, there is silverness, and then their identity. This is equal to silver. So the Nayayika believes that both these things are real, but their identity is wrong. And the reason for the Nayayika to believe again that this particular silver is real is because he has trouble accepting that something unreal cannot be cognized. Okay, please remember this point, because this is the so-called departure that you were looking for. Everyone else except the Bauddha accepts this thing. Okay, the Bauddha says that the silver exists in the mind. It is not totally asat, but it's not just the silver. This whatever is there also is false. Their tadatmya, their samsarga, or their contact, or their identity, the thisness and the silverness, that is also false. And so everything is false. Of course, the silver exists here. That's why you are able to perceive it there. That is what the Bauddha says. Mayavada says asat is something that cannot be perceived. And because the silver in front was perceived, it is not asat. Okay. So therefore they say that it is anirvachaniya. So our position is that, as in the Tattvavada position is that asat is perceived in illusions. And therefore most of the debate is around exactly this point. Is asat perceived or not perceived? So Acharya says something, if asat cannot be perceived, how did you even make this statement? Right? Asat cannot be perceived. How do you even know that? So then they come to say, no, it is not total perception or imperception. What we are talking about, it should be aparoksha darshana is not there. Are you able to follow me here?
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So, but for that, for which we say, for example, the Mayavadins say that, there are something which are absolutely unreal. For for example, your son of a barren woman, or take the hairs of a horn kind of thing, right? These are absolutely unreal. But what we say is that, given the appropriate conditions, even they can be perceived because it is an illusion. For example, somebody, one of my friends, in fact, he drew a hair and then he put 2 horns on that. A person who doesn't know that this is imagery, or this image does not have corresponding reality, they will have the illusion that horse have hairs have horns there. So it is the entire theory that asat cannot be perceived is basically wrong. And in fact, this is also proven by the fact that anirvachaniya, if it were to be anirvachaniya is not perceived. Correct? Anirvachaniyatva, the anirvachaniyaness is not perceived. It is perceived as real. So therefore, again, there is some gap over there, right? Something which was not there got perceived. So that is same as saying that accepting that unreal got perceived. So because of this theory, Acharya, this is one of his major points, that asat, if you say asat cannot be perceived, how did you even make this statement? He mentions this thing not just in Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya, but it's there in Anuvyakhana also. So of course the Advaitic authors who have come after him, they try to modify their stance. Projecting that this is an explanation or a clarification. There is no essential change in the stance. That is more of the optics, so to speak. But definitely that argument has impacted the Advaitic stream of thought that has come after Acharya, and you can see it in the way they present their arguments, be it in Advaita Siddhi or the text later coming after that. Now, with this, there is one important point I would like to summarize at Abhinava-anyatha-khyathi. Basically, we said that Asat can be perceived, and it is that it can be perceived is told even in the correcting cognition, which says that whatever I saw earlier was unreal. So it means that there was a perception of the unreal. And unlike the Buddha who says that even that whatever that thisness is false, we accept that thisness is real. And unlike the Nayayika who says that silver has to exist somewhere because only then there can be some cognition of that, we accept that it doesn't have to exist anywhere else at the time of the cognition. So there are some more of these things, but the reason why erroneous knowledge got generated is because there was flaw in one of these three things, either the sensory organ or the object or the nature of the contact. This forms the basis for our today's topic. This is what I have put here. So this is what we are trying to tell, that if there is that red thing, for the moment consider that as a flaw. The theory is that if there is a flaw in any of these instruments of knowledge, it will produce wrong knowledge. That is the main idea here. So it could be wrong sensory contact. So either the sensory organ is flawed or the object is flawed. When I say object is flawed, the nature of contact itself is flawed. The object is too bright, for example, than what your visual capabilities are. So then also you will not be able to see it, right? Or if the object is too close or too far, then it can lead to flaws in the knowledge that is produced by that kind of sensory contact. So it is not something unique to Acharya here at this point of time. Everybody accepts the same thing, that flaw is necessary to produce wrong knowledge. I mean, most of us at least will accept that, and all Vedanta schools definitely they accept the same thing, including Advaita school here. Now, the point here is, right, so we have knowledge, and we saw that these are the three elements of knowledge. What we will see today is what I am trying to present now. There is a knower of what are the different elements of knowledge. So when we say there is knowledge, there is a pramatra, which means there is a knower of that knowledge. I mean, knowledge cannot just hang in air somewhere. Somebody has to have that knowledge, possess that knowledge, and there should be an object of that knowledge. While the Advaita theory says that these two cannot be same, we say that most of the time they need not be same. But when I say I know myself, they both are same at this, and there is nothing that really stops us from accepting that. Then there is another important point, which is what our actions are based on. So there is either validity, there is invalidity, which is apramanya. And of course, there is another state, which is this is nischita. Okay, this is conclusive. Either it is, I mean, it could be, you could either say that it is wrongly concluded, but still it is concluded. So when I am trying to pick up that seashell, which I have mistaken as silver, there is conclusiveness in that particular knowledge. But when I'm hesitating, let's say, I do not know whether it is truly a seashell or a silver or whatever it may be, there is a doubt, samshaya. So in general, there are three types of knowledge. One is prama, there is brahma, and then there is samshaya. Prama is valid knowledge, brahma is invalid knowledge, and samshaya is inconclusive. Basically, you do not know what the true thing is. Now we will worry about the samshaya thing later. I mean, though there are theories on what produces this samshaya, right? We will come to that later if need be again. But our main focus will be on what produces this validity or invalidity. Because see, the idea is, this is where I am trying to show that how does Sakshi accept, cognize this thing? Why are we depending so much on Sakshi? My final position is that there is no way you can say that there is something called as valid knowledge in this world without accepting something called as Sakshi. Okay, it is a logical requirement. That's what we will come to in the subsequent slides. So there are two problems when it comes to validity or invalidity, right? So look at this like any other entity, like, pot is there, or, laptop is there, or a phone is there, right? All of them have something has produced that. And then there is one of these three instruments of knowledge, which is apprehending that, right? So apply the same idea, right? Something must have produced it, and then something must have apprehended that. One of these three instruments must have comprehended or apprehended that particular validity or invalidity. Without that, the whole edifice of validity or invalidity will break. If there was nothing which produces that, but you are still apprehending, it means that it's an illusion. The whole thing is an illusion, right? But our experience doesn't say that. Our experience says that, for example, I exist is valid knowledge. I was happy is valid knowledge. Okay, I mistook it to be a snake. Okay, the I mistook, the correcting knowledge also produces what do you call that is valid. But at whatever I had mistaken, that is invalid. So we do have some pieces of knowledge or some knowledge, which is there is certitude about its validity, and there is also certitude about its invalidity later. So we have to accept that there was something which produced this validity. Just like, the mud must produce the pot. If there was no mud but pot was seen, it means that guy is hallucinating, right? So validity must have been, something must have produced that validity, and something must have apprehended that. Now what we will see in the subsequent slides is analysis of different schools on what that thing is. Once we go through this, whatever statements you understood from Jayatheertharu, you will understand that. We will also give the justification for that. Okay. So there are these two parts that we saw here, right? One is the production of these things, and another one is the apprehension of these things. So we will talk only about the first question, which is what produces this validity and invalidity. Okay, there are, it's a matrix sort of thing. You could put it in a nice quadrant kind of structure if need be. So this is what the first one is what a Nayayika says, and people assume that science also says the same thing. Okay. So basically, producer of knowledge is, look at it. I'll show you a schematic representation a little later. But assume that there is knowledge, and then which is produced by the instrument of knowledge, and then there is good factor. Okay, so-called good factor, which is, for example, in case of a text, right? A good, knowledgeable, trustworthy author is such a good factor. Now, both these things put together produce this valid knowledge. So the good factors produce validity, and instruments produce just knowledge. So only when both of them are together, you have something called as valid knowledge. If you just have the instrument, it does not produce validity. It only produces knowledge. This is one theory. The Nayayika says this thing. Okay. The other one is instrument of knowledge is by default the producer of valid knowledge also. Okay, you don't need an extraneous factor. You don't need any factor which is outside of this instrument to produce that validity.
Can I
Are you able to follow me here?
Yeah. Can I ask you a question here?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So when you say produce knowledge same as producer of validity, is it something like self-evident knowledge?
No, so that is a very loaded term, self-evident knowledge, right? When you say self-evident, it does not need any other thing to validate that. Is what you mean?
Yes.
Or no, 1 minute. So validity. So we are talking about. We'll come to the self-evident little later, okay? Because self-evidence has two parts there, right? One is it should not be. One is its production. What produces that evidence is one thing, and what apprehends that evidence in such a manner that it does not need any other evidence. That's the meaning of self-evidence, right? Right. So that is what we are trying to analyze here. When you say self-evident, we need to understand what produces that evidence which does not need anything else, and what apprehends this validity or this evidence-ness in such a manner that you don't need any other means. You don't need any other instrument. That's what we are trying to analyze here. Just saying self-evident is not going to be sufficient. That's my point. I hope I'm clear so far. Yeah.
Yes.
So this is the second theory about, validity. Basically, they say that, the instrument of knowledge itself produces this validity, and for example, words, whether it doesn't matter, who the author is, words by default, they produce valid knowledge. You don't need to know, for example, if you find 2 + 2 = 4 on a piece of paper, you don't care who wrote it. It is valid knowledge. Okay, that is the implication here. The same thing on the other side is invalidity. Okay, so invalidity and validity are not just, absences of each other. It's very important to note this point, right? Validity is not absence of invalidity, or like, light and darkness, or, things like that. They are opposing to each other. They oppose each other. Like, sukha and dukkha, happiness and pain. So you need therefore understand. So they are bhava padartha. They are positive. They are actual things that need to be produced. Right. So what produces invalidity? So one theory is that, there are bad factors. For example, I have jaundice and in the eye, and therefore it produces defective knowledge. The instrument, the eye itself, does not produce invalid knowledge. Okay. The other theory is the opposite, which is that, whatever produces knowledge also produces invalidity. Okay. Eyes produce defective knowledge by default. Okay. Only when you have something which corrects it, that invalidity is removed. This is one way to look at it. Okay. So there are these 4 positions, of course, on validity and invalidity. The Nayayika takes this one. Okay. So this is important for us to understand as to on what basis will you take any of these positions. Can you take a guess there?
On what basis?
So for example, let's say you take this position. Good factors produce validity. Okay. So every time, okay, I have valid knowledge, there are 2 things involved over there. One is instrument of knowledge. Another one is some good factor. Right. Unless both these things are there, valid knowledge is never produced.
Right.
This is one position. In the other position, instrument of knowledge produces both.
Both.
Yeah. Are you able to see this now?
Yes, yes.
So this is utpattau paratastvam, and utpatti is pramanya utpatti. How does this pramanya get produced? That is a question here. So in this theory, both these things are needed, and then valid knowledge is produced. Right. In this theory, the instrument itself is good enough, so and it will produce valid knowledge.
Right.
And in this theory, okay, apramanya. How does invalidity get produced? When there are bad factors or invalid flaws in the along with the instrument, then it produces invalid knowledge. When there is in this theory, the instrument itself is bad is defective by default.
Correct.
Okay, so the Buddha holds this theory, for example.
Yes.
Now, on what basis will you accept any of them? Either this or this, and in this case, either this or this. On what basis will you do that? So again, Acharya says.
I would like to answer here for a reason. It also, my answer also connects to your statement that when 2 + 2 = 4 is seen, you don't need to know who is the producer because we know it is correct, what you mentioned. So I'm correcting these 2 things I'm saying. You think 2 + 2 is 4 is correct without knowing who is the producer because you have been, to use a crude word, brainwashed into accepting 2 + 2 is 4. A priori, you have been brainwashed into accepting that, and therefore you are saying this. You don't need a producer, and therefore, if you ask me, really speaking, which are the 4 I would select would very much dependent upon, again using the same crude word, a priori brainwashed state in which I am will determine which one I will choose.
No, that finally you need to take these positions, right, sir? You need to say, okay, in this one I will take 1, and in this one also I will take 1. That's what you're trying to say, that, whether when you say brainwashed, okay, it means that, without brainwashing, you need a trustworthy author and you need his words, and then only valid knowledge is produced. That's what you are effectively saying.
Correct.
You are trying to reject my example, agreed, but the position that you are taking is this. Am I right?
That is very true. Very true. Logical conclusion. Yes.
Right. So this is what the Nayayika does. And this is what everybody thinks that, science also does. So we have this knowledge. Okay. We have this, perception and all these things that we are doing over there. Now, when there is agreement, when it produces, how do we know it produces correct knowledge? When there are good factors around, trustworthy author, or good application of logic, or the necessary, the instrument is not, for example, the eye is capable, you are not too sleepy, and then there is enough light around, all those things. Those are not just essential factors or necessary factors. They are the ones which are actually producing it, is what your position is.
Correct.
Yeah. Same thing here. You will say that the instrument does not produce invalidity. It is presence of bad factors. Or which one will you take here? You could take the other way around also. See, for example, you can say that by default instrument produce wrong knowledge. Unless there are good factors, it will not produce valid knowledge. Both of these things are, you can make a choice there. But only thing is you'll have to justify that at the end of it.
And somehow, I think I'm falling into a trap, but still I can say somehow it doesn't sound satisfactory to say that instrument by itself produces wrong knowledge and somehow mysteriously it gets corrected. Doesn't sound to be valid.
No, it is not mysteriously. No. There is nothing mysterious here. See, for example, look at it as a simple, a mathematical thing. Like, there is one thing which produces knowledge. There is another thing which produces validity, and there is another thing that produces invalidity. So in this situation, right, what we are saying is that the instrument produces invalid knowledge. This instrument, along with good factors, will produce knowledge, good knowledge, valid knowledge. That is here. So even if there is red over this, right, even if that instrument is red, because of the presence of these good factors, you will produce valid knowledge. And vice versa. In this particular situation, the other thing is, even if the instrument is good by default, because of the presence of flaws, it produces invalid knowledge. No, that is also a corollary of this one.
That is why I have difficulty in understanding this. You are calling it as a good factor. Then how can it produce a error there? What is the point in calling it a good factor and still say it produces erroneous thing?
No. Good factor never produces erroneous knowledge. The theory here is that instrument plus good factors produce valid knowledge.
In the next case, next slide case, the red slide case, yeah.
So these bad factors they overpower the instrument's inherent capabilities to produce just knowledge or to produce valid knowledge. And I'm talking about two positions here. So you can say that instrument produces only let me show you one more thing also, right? If I make that thing.
Okay. Probably I'll explain why I'm having this kind of thought process, a complication thought process.
Sure.
I tend to think that the instrument produces neither a bad knowledge nor a good knowledge. The instrument produces just signals. Very
good. And that is why I did not color the instrument thing here. That is what this position is.
Got it. Internal to us, we have certain ways of producing value judgments, which would determine something is good or bad.
I didn't understand that second part. Okay. So when I say instrument, we are talking about the entire apparatus of the this one here, right? So it is not just this particular the first leg here. The whole thing is what we are talking about.
Correct. The whole thing.
So when you say internal, we talk about manas also. Manas also, in fact, introduces error there, right? Because of raga, dvesha, and brainwashing and all those things.
It is part of the instrument, yes.
Right. So when you say this, okay. So instrument produces knowledge. Good factors make it valid. Bad factors make it invalid.
Correct.
That is one position. Another
Yes.
position is instrument is good by default. It doesn't need good factors. It will produce valid knowledge. But if it has overpowering bad factors, then it will produce invalid knowledge.
Where does bad factor reside?
No, this is in different cases. For example, when I am seeing a rope as rope, okay, there are good factors. When I am seeing rope as a snake, there are bad factors which has influenced that particular cognition.
Correct. My argument is that bad factor does not reside in rope. Bad factor resides in the mind.
The bad factors can reside in many other places also, sir. Because, for example, let's say there is poor light, okay, because of which you are not able to see the rope properly.
Okay.
So that is a negative bad factor.
Okay, got it. Understood. Conditions.
Or that's what I said, the bad factor could be, for example, the object is too far off, right? So then also you'll not be able to make out. Or the object, you must have seen a lot of these perception errors or, illusions that people talk of in the modern world, especially, right? You see these icons which keep changing their colors and you get the illusion of movement over there.
Correct.
So they're all bad factors that influence your cognition or your judgment at the end of it. So these good factors are there, these bad factors are there. So there are multiple theories here. So in any case, the main idea here is that this is the default behavior. That's why I put default word over there, right?
Can I ask you a little more question, deeper question?
Yeah, so, go ahead. Before that, sorry to interrupt there. See, main thing is that what we are discussing here has nothing to do with Tattva Vaada alone. These are questions that philosophers should answer themselves.
Agree. That is why I'm pushing deeper into this. I totally agree with you. See, independent of how you want to position in the end, but as a process of logical analysis, this is very important for everybody.
Including science.
Including science. Tell me when I can ask the question.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Okay. So, everything is not mistaken to be a snake. Only a rope is mistaken to be a snake. Everything is not mistaken to be a silver. Only some seashells are mistaken to be a silver. And therefore, is it not right to argue the snakeness is resident in this rope itself? It is why blame the environment? Because the snake is resident in the rope, silverness resident in the shell. Only because of that, you understand it as a snake and silver respectively.
So this is also one of the theories that, for example, the Vishishtadvaita school says that, they, for example, believe that due to Trivrit Karana, because everything is mix of all these three elements, which is detailed in Chandogya Upanishad, right? They assume that there is something of everything in, some element of everything in each substance out there. But deeper analysis says that is truly not the case. It may sound mystical and it may give you some sense of satisfaction for the time being, but truly speaking, you can explain that with a much simpler sadrishya, which is much simpler similarity. The rope is similar to snake in its shape, and that's why you mistake it like that. And you mistake it only when there is when there is poor light. And even when the correcting cognition is there, the nature or the form of your correcting cognition is not of the form. You know what? I assumed that this particular object, it was 100% snake, but it is actually 0.001% snake. Do you say that? You don't say that. You say this is not snake.
Correct.
So because of that correcting knowledge, you have to admit that it is not little bit here. And so similarity is one of the things that explains why there is only some things can be, mistaken to something else. So that's what we even mentioned here. Sadrishya with aropya. If you notice here, I didn't show this particular slide last time. So there are these prerequisites that, whatever is superimposed, it needs to have some similarity with whatever is the underlying reality. So that's why if you say, the world is unreal, to explain this entire unreal, false, anirvachaniya, whatever you call that, There needs to be some other real world, and then there needs to be a real world which looks similar to this world. So you need at least two real worlds then.
Okay.
That's the.
Okay. We'll wait for that. I know that Cardion is coming sometime in future. We'll wait for that. But therefore, in other words, to recalibrate my statement, what you're saying is the snakeness does not reside in the rope, but an attribute element of a snakeness represents is present in the rope. That is why a sadrishya happens.
No. Snakeness has a certain length or certain shape. Rope has a certain shape and length. They both look similar. That similarity causes the illusion. It produces the ground for, it makes the ground for the illusion to happen. And that illusion happens when there are other, factors like poor light, and you have been dealing with lots of snakes lately. That's why you find that. I mean, so on and so forth, right? So there is no element of snakeness in the rope. Okay, they are similar in some aspects. That's all. The similarity is what exists in the rope.
Hold on. The similarity exists where?
In the rope.
See, the similarity of the snake and rope, a rope with snake rather, it is not just in the mind of the onlooker, right? It is present in the rope also.
Correct. Therefore,
an attribute of snakeness is present in rope.
What is that attribute?
Shape and form.
Yeah, but it is not exactly the snake or form there, right? It is similarity to that, this one. See, okay, I think what we are trying to show is that, see, when I say similarity exists in the rope, I don't mean to say that it is like, there are two instances of the same shape and form. One shape and form exists in the snake, another one exists in the rope. They are both similar. So you don't need that to say that snake itself exists in some form in the rope. That will be a leap of, that will be jumping the gun, right? And you are basically saying that the same snake shape exists over here.
Correct. Understood.
The shape of the rope is similar, is that the similarity is what exists over here. And similarity exists even in the, in the snake also. A real snake elsewhere. Yeah.
Correct. Very true. So obviously you're laying grounds for a later day argument to say that this means at least two realities, not.
No, it is what do you say, self-evident actually. It only needs brainwashing not to accept it. That's all. We'll come to that later, sure.
We'll debate that when we get there. Yeah.
So here there are these different positions, and this is a default position. The exception cases is that, in this particular case, they say that, for example, if there are overwhelming bad factors, it can produce invalid knowledge. In this case also, if there are overwhelming bad factors, it can produce invalid knowledge, and vice versa here. So in this case, if there are overwhelming good factors, or if there are no bad factors, if there are no bad factors and there are good factors, then it produces valid knowledge. And in this case, if there are overwhelming good factors, then it produces valid knowledge. That is the models in which we can argue. But the main point is that on what basis will you determine whether some factor is good or bad? This is an argument you cannot escape in this theory.
Yes.
Okay. So you need to accept that something can be cognized without the presence of a good factor as good by itself. I'll repeat that. So let's take this thing, right? Good light is there, and you say therefore good light is a factor, good factor, right? Or a good author is there, or a trustworthy author is there. That factor is essential to produce valid knowledge. Now, how do you know he's trustworthy? Because of XYZ reasons. How do you know that those XYZ reasons are good? Because of something else. It will go into a regress. So therefore, If it goes into a regress, it means that you can never have valid knowledge. But does our experience say the same thing? Our experience says that we have valid knowledge. I exist. I don't need any other good factors or anything like that over there. It is known by default. Okay. I got confused. I did a mistake. I am happy. I was happy. I slept well. All these experiences, you don't need any other factor to tell you it is correct or not correct. By default, you know that it is correct. You don't need correlation with something else. You don't need corroboration with another evidence to say that these things happen. These things are valid. Right? Even after, so therefore, there may be some examples that you may think that, like your good light, where we assume that, it may, this particular theory is valid, but truly that is not the case. For example, take this thing, right? How many of our experiences, you are driving on the road, are you basically saying that, okay, there are good factors, therefore I am driving the experience of driving on the road is valid? No. It is so natural, it is so intrinsic that by default you have to accept that, I know that this knowledge is valid.
I have a problem here. See, this intuitive knowledge that I'm driving on a good safe road is a
no. Good safe road, I'm not saying that. I am driving, I am talking, you are saying something. There is a laptop in front of me. We deal with all these pieces of knowledge as valid without depending on something else. See, when I say good factors, it means that I need to perceive both of them to be able to say that there is valid knowledge.
Got it. Very correct.
So all of our experience, in fact, is mostly without the need for a good factor to produce it. So by default, our experience says instrument itself is capable of producing both knowledge and validity. On the other hand, okay, if I say only bad factors can produce invalid knowledge, how do I know that bad factors are there? That is because my Sakshi can tell me here, right, that there is a bad factor over there without going into a regress. Otherwise, the same regress factor exists here also.
So good argument. So is Sakshi a matter of convenience or to argue argument convenience to eliminate infinite regress?
Very nice.
You need something to stop the argument, and therefore I'm going to do this. Is it like that?
So it is not just a postulation. It's an see. We have been talking about Sakshi as being evident to us from experience so far. Correct. So we are not postulating something totally unknown, like ether or God or heaven or hell, or we are not postulating anything or even karma, for example, to explain something over here. We are not doing arthapatti or we are not doing anumana.
Right.
This is evident to us. We are just putting a theory to explain that experience, and we are rejecting theories which do not cater to that experience. So I will put.
Hello, your video is frozen.
Sorry.
For a moment, it was frozen. Yeah.
Was I audible then?
No, you suddenly your whole thing, voice as well as sound ceased. Yeah.
Oh, I'm not too sure. Where was I basically?
No. For example, you said and then it stopped. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you're trying to explain that we are not postulating something out of the blue. Yeah.
We are basically saying that our experience gives us all these things, right? And just like it tells us that there is, the experiencer is the most fundamental entity out there, which is different from matter. The experiencer at a very fundamental level is irreducible. It cannot be a product of, multiple neurons coming and hitting each other. The experiencer is experiencing this external world, irrespective of what they experience over there, or that there are 3 states, or that there is bliss. All these things are given. So what we are trying to say is that there is that not just immutable, but that experiencer whose validity to himself or herself is beyond that question. And you cannot just put it as intuition. There is a little bit, degradation when you say intuition there. It is naturally available to that particular experience. The experience himself or herself is available to them. And the same thing applies even to validity and invalidity. Validity is available in all our experiences. That's why, I don't keep questioning whether I am really truly seeing a laptop or not. And this is the very reason why, you may just, pause and say, maybe all of this is a dream, or, or somebody is, put some, I forgot that person's name, who did that experiment with putting notes, Penrose, right? So you cannot say that maybe somebody is, activating some node over there, some, nodes in the brain, and that's why I am experiencing this. All of that is, they need proof. I don't need proof that, I exist, or, all of this is real. Unless there is a correcting cognition, I cannot accept that thing to be true. And so by default, it is valid. It is a given experience. So we are just trying to put a name saying that is Sakshi, because Sakshi means witness. So we are witness to all these things. Right? So therefore, the Tattvavada theory on the production of validity, invalidity is this. Producer of knowledge is same as producer of validity. And so by default, when I say by default, the Indriya there has the capability to produce that particular knowledge as well as the validity. It doesn't need anything extraneous to it. So this is important when it comes to, for example, the Apaurushayatva theory, right? You don't need the author to be known to for it to be valid, right? Even if somebody is saying that, if you will know that those words are valid, and unless that somebody is, for example, let's say, he's in an inebriated state, or, if you have a doubt about that person's validity, then this thing can get stalled. And on the other hand, bad factors will produce invalidity. This is the Tattvavada situation. And all other systems of schools of Vedanta also accept the same thing. It is not anything new here. The opposition is the Nayayika school, who believes in A and D. And Nayayika believes in A and C. Bauddha believes in A and D. Basically, they believe that all organs, all instruments are defective by nature. Only when there is positive influence, okay, they produce validity. Again, the regress problem is big time over there also. The same, and the Nayayika holds that validity needs an externus factor. Invalidity does also needs an externus factor. So that also will go into regress on both sides. Okay. So this is on the production. The other side, which is more important, is how is this cognized?
Before you go there, is it the basis of Jayatheertharu's statement?
Yes. Now let me explain his statement once. I think it has two things in his statement. There are two things in his statement, so it is better to go through this and then we'll come to Jayatheertharu's statement.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So see here, this is what Nayayika says. He believes that. Now we are in the next question, by the way. Okay, we are talking about the apprehension. One thing is, production of the validity, like a pot or something like that. Who produced that is a question. What grasped that? See, now you have to talk about which instrument grasped that thing. So, very important question here, because this is where I believe, though all other schools which accepted Swatastva in case of production, basically, intrinsically all producers of knowledge produce validity. There are other schools which accept that, like Advaita or the Mimamsa. When it comes to this, they also say the same thing, but they do a mistake there. I will tell you the reason for that later in the next slide, couple of slides actually. So here what the Nayayika says, that even this apprehension is through inference. What this means is that, I get knowledge 1, I get knowledge 2. If they are both in agreement, then I say the knowledge 1, whichever I got, is true, because whatever piece of knowledge 2 and knowledge 3 that I have got before, they are all true. Since there is agreement between them, it is true. This is the way of doing it.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, somebody's trying to call me. I'll talk later. Yeah.
Okay. So they believe that, for example, how do I know that my knowledge is correct, is valid? If the source is valid, then the product, which is the knowledge, is also valid. If the source is infected, then the product, which is, the knowledge, is also flawed. So this is an inferential thing for them.
Correct.
And who is comprehending whether the source is good, product is good and all that? It is the manas.
Manas.
That's what they believe. But this is where the big time infinite regress comes. If
Right.
there is to be something else which will tell me that this particular knowledge is true or valid,
yes,
how do you know that that particular thing is valid?
Correct.
There is no way to escape this one.
Yes.
So even in science, right? For example, this is where they mistake this thing, right? You say that I experiment, right? I hypothesis, I test it, and if there are corrections that I need to do, I will correct it. That is the regular theory. On what basis will you say that your experiment is valid? Or whatever readings that you noted down, how do you know they are valid? That question you need to answer, right? How do you know that, for example, when I drop these two things and from the Eiffel Tower or wherever it is, the Pisa, Leaning Tower of Pisa, they came at the same time. How do you know? You have to admit that whatever I saw is true. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. How do you know that is true? You do another experiment? Maybe let's say we do another experiment. How do you know that the experiment was noted, recorded properly or measured properly?
One more.
Yeah. So somewhere you'll have to say, look, I know it. Okay. You don't question it any further. I know it. Somebody has to say that.
Correct.
So they may not, they may not talk about this, what do you call this, infinite regress or whatever it is, but somebody has to say, look, at one point, somewhere in that entire chain of reasoning, I say, I know it. Don't ask. There are no questions. So that's the point Nayayik also says. He says that, only when there is doubt, I need another corroborating evidence.
Correct.
When there is no doubt,
I don't need.
Okay. There is no regress either. That's his point. But the question is, again, there also, why did the doubt come?
Correct.
Right. So whatever he does, he cannot escape the fact that if you say only agreement between two pieces of knowledge is what makes them valid, or inference is how I understand, I understand validity, there is no way the regress can be avoided. Okay. So for example, that doubt is there. That doubt is there. Okay. Now, in another case, the doubt is not there. How do you know that doubt exists? How do you know that doubt does not exist? Right? That also has to be comprehended. Hello?
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So eventually, basically, you will have to somewhere say that, okay, I can comprehend this particular thing as true. I comprehend and therefore it is true. So see here, it is not, in this case, there is inference in case of the Nayayika. And most of us, right, when we start understanding philosophy or when we try to think of these questions, this is how we will go through. We will go through exactly the same things that you mentioned. We will assume that there are positive factors. We'll assume that there are negative factors. Positive factors plus instrument will lead to validity and valid knowledge, and negative factors will lead to invalid knowledge. This is what we all start with. But when we start analyzing our own experience, it is inescapable that you have to admit that when, at least in the production, you don't need any other factor. The instrument is good enough. But in case of invalidity, you need to have a bad factor. You cannot reverse these positions. You cannot say that, by default, instrument produces invalid factors, invalid knowledge. If you take that position, you will never be able to say that there is a valid knowledge at all on earth. For that you have experienced.
Correct.
So therefore, you cannot reverse that position. You have to say, whatever Tattva position is the only way of going forward for that. And other schools of Vedanta also accept the same thing. The only problem comes after this, right? So let me summarize before going to other schools here. So if there is valid knowledge, now we are talking about the apprehension part of it. There are two things. Sakshi perceives both knowledge and validity. And validity is not perceived or cognized because of an inference. I see knowledge and I see validity in whatever produced that knowledge, or I see, a trustworthy author. Therefore, that inference is not there here. I get knowledge from these words, and I can perceive the validity directly, unless there is a blocking factor. That is a point here. But in case of invalid knowledge, this is where we say that it is slightly different. If there is invalid knowledge, Sakshi perceives only knowledge. So when I see a rope and snake, I accept the knowledge that I see a snake, but I do not accept the lack of validity or any other invalidity that it is produced along there.
Yes.
I do not perceive that thing. I perceive only the knowledge.
Correct.
How do I know there is invalidity? Only subsequently. So I put two pieces of knowledge. I saw a snake, but it is wrong. When I put these two things together, I know that invalidity was there in that knowledge. Only when there is a correcting cognition, I can make out that there is invalidity. Correct. Otherwise, I cannot say that there is invalidity. And when I do pariksha, when I inspect my sources of knowledge, it is to remove these potential sources of invalidity. It is not to produce validity. My tests are not meant to produce validity. They are meant to remove potential sources of invalidity. Very important distinction there, right?
Got it.
But then the main thing that the main lacuna in this model is, why will you then try to pick up that particular seashell, right? If you do not perceive it to be valid,
right,
why did you even go after it? Or when you saw the snake, why did you become afraid?
Yes.
If you do not perceive its validity or invalidity. So here, Dvaita's theory, I'm not too sure if other schools of thought have gone to this depth on this particular topic. But here what we say that, there are two judgment centers. Basically, one is the Sakshi, another one is Manas. So Manas, because of its Raga Dvesha, when it puts in all those other, these other masala in there, it also can make you pick up something. Yes. It can lead to unhesitating, nishanka pravritti, which is unhesitating volitive action. I get afraid, or I will feel greedy about picking up that particular seashell. This is all the judgment of Manas. But we will know that these things are wrong, again, because there is connecting cognition. So Sakshi, without Sakshi being there, or without something which can perceive, which can behave in this particular manner. When I say this manner, it should perceive both knowledge and validity. It should perceive knowledge only and without invalidity. You cannot explain the universal experiences where we have valid knowledge, which are beyond doubt, and there are cases where there is invalid knowledge also. Without this thing, you cannot explain, why there is no infinite regress. So you need something, some cognizer, something. We are calling it Sakshi, but there is something which we have to accept, that which can do both these things, whatever I have mentioned in points 1 and 3 over here. Okay. Of course, it can, because of the sometimes the manas is little too quick, right? It can. That's what Vaada Swami says, that it is sometimes hasty because of your previous experiences or brainwashing. Therefore, it can lead to unhesitating volitive action. Therefore, it can lead to something that can, not liking something, or it can say that, I am afraid of the snake and so on and so forth. But when you do the experiment, when you do the more inspection or investigation, you understand that there was invalidity over there. And then that is how you say that, after the correcting cognition is superior to the previous delusional knowledge. Otherwise, see, you have just two pieces of knowledge. This is rope, this is snake. On what basis will you say this is powerful than this? There is no way to say that.
Yeah.
Right? So, but this has other implications, right? Okay, let me complete this model.
Yes.
So this is just a schematic again for that. If there is valid knowledge, the Sakshi cognizes that. So the reason why I have put it in dotted line is that you should not assume that, there is some input that is happening over here, or there is something that is the Sakshi is changing because of this knowledge. It just comprehends, it just reflects whatever is there here. So that's why I have shown it slightly differently. So the Sakshi comprehends both knowledge and validity. In case of invalid knowledge, Sakshi comprehends only knowledge and it is not too sure, or it doesn't do anything about the invalidity. And this is true even in case of mental blockers. For example, if your mind is producing enough masala there, then also it can lead to invalid knowledge. All your doubt or your brainwashing, whatever you mentioned, are all different types of flaws in the manas. They can also stall the Sakshi from accepting the validity there. This is the default model, and without this, you cannot explain the universal experience. That is why, and this is same as the Tattva thing. And here the point is, last one. Okay, this is after this we'll go to the Jayatheertha statement. So here, see, we are talking about Sakshi, or there needs to be some cognizer which has these capabilities. It should perceive both knowledge and validity. It should perceive only knowledge. All this thing is fine. But there is an implicit requirement or constraint we are putting on the nature of that particular cognizer. It should know itself. I know this thing, right? I perceive the validity of this cognition, that there is ground below my feet.
Yes.
This particular perception itself, it should not lead to regress. What is the validity of this perception? Whatever I perceived this validity, it should perceive itself and the validity of its own perception. This is not accepted in the Advaita school or the Mimamsa school. There is self-reference here. Without accepting this self-reference, you cannot have a Pramanya Swatastva model, whatever this model is. So Advaita and Mimamsa school, they accept this thing, but they do not accept this particular issue.
That's very true.
That is where there is a problem. There is a big problem. Right? Because Kartru Karma, they put all these other things that there should be Kartru Karma, Virodha should not be there. But that is impossible. You cannot have a Pramanya Swatastva model without accepting that, whoever is cognizing that validity can also cognize the validity of that own perception and that their own self. And that, they should also perceive that this is unshakable. This cannot be changed. Yes, sir. So with this, I would like to end my today's session. Basically, what we have gone one step ahead by saying that Sakshi is essential to explain universal experiences of valid knowledge and invalid knowledge. We also established that without accepting something like this, all the other, for example, Advaitic experience is there, right? How do you know that is valid? The Sakshi should tell that it is valid. Without that, there is no way of telling that, right? Whether Sakshi tells it or not, that's a different thing. But unless you have this witness of all validity and invalidity later, you cannot explain that knowledge. You cannot explain the experience of valid knowledge and invalid knowledge. And that experience or that witness should experience oneself also. It should know that I am a witness. It should know that I have perceived this to be valid, and that validity is beyond question. All these things, unless it cognizes, it is not a witness at all. So, therefore, Acharya's explanations are, you have to just accept them. It is inevitable. There is no other way. We will come to the other things about, what are the different doshas, right? Flaws or which lead to this particular invalid knowledge and things like that. And therein I will try to explain, why we do not accept that Advaitic experience is really an experience or anything like that, or why it is not flawless experience. We will come to that thing little later or in the next session. And after that, we will go to the more important part, which is Agama. I think, we need to talk about, how we basically, that is the next most important part, which is that of Aporishaya. And then, we need to say how Vishnu Sarvottamatva, are we just being, sectarian, all those questions will come then. We will talk about that.
Very clearly, the way you are building up, I can see a logical conclusion that why Vishnu is necessary and why Vishnu has to be Sarvottama. All that you're building up, very beautifully you're building up, I can see that. Leave this slide on.
Okay, 1 minute. Sorry. Give me a minute, please.
No, it's okay. Not necessary. This is perfectly fine. I talk from memory, so I don't have to be accurate. You would probably explain Jayatheertharu's statement, and then in my concluding portion, I will come back to this slide. Yeah, I think this slide is not necessary. You can take it off. Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's nice. It's nice to look at you directly and talk. Yeah, you can remove the slide.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. So do you want to explain the Jayatheertharu statement? Then I can conclude.
Yes, I need to have that his statement here. So he says outsargikam. Outsargikam means by default or in general. So there is utsarga and apavada. You understand these terms?
Yeah.
Utsarga is by in general. Okay.
Yes.
Apavada is as an exception.
Contrary. Yeah.
Okay. So outsargikanam jnananam pramanyam. Okay. Apavadastu apavadah tad viparyayah. It should be tad actually. It is not ad viparyayah. It is tad viparyayah. So by default, by in general, jnana is produced along with validity. That's what our experience says that, right? Only sometimes I doubt that maybe this is not true, right? Otherwise, you cannot explain our this entire conversation itself and so many other activities that we do over there, and not just activities, our own internal states, our own feelings. We have never, these are beyond questionable validity. They are taken to be valid. So by default, this is the case. Only some exceptions are there where the pramanya of the jnana itself, the knowledge itself, is not there. Okay. Sakshi, on the other hand, only when Sakshi, it will take this particular nischita yathartyam kadachit kapi samshaya anaskanditah. Okay. So he says that this is the Badarayana Mata. This is basically the position of the Vedavyasa. Whatever I just mentioned, it is that Sakshi by default, it will cognize the Yatharthya, which is the Pramanya, along with the knowledge. Okay. What can block it? There are some cases where it can because of mental reasons or because of other factors, it can get interrupted or it can get polluted, that acceptance of that validity. So when it is anaskandita, which is when it is not infected by any of those reasons for doubt or reasons for invalidity, then okay, by default it will take those things to be these antakarana vritti. Basically it will take these modifications in the mind. So eventually all knowledge that gets produces some change in the manas. That is same as the antakarana vritti that we mentioned in the previous slides. So when that happens, it takes that thing as default by to be valid by default in general. Only when there is some flaw, or only when there is it will not accept the validity, and at that point of time there will be some sort of pariksha, and that with the aid of that pariksha it will determine, okay, it was whatever I perceived then was invalid. For example, when I see a snake, first time I show fear, then I'll say, okay, let me put on the light, I switch on the light, I get to see that thing, I do pariksha, and then I see, okay, that was a rope. So then the rope cognition is held to be true, okay, because Sakshi that is a default behavior, and only the exception behavior, what it was perceived earlier, that's what Sakshi will understand. That's what is very briefly over there. There are many arguments that come before this one, sir. It takes a little this one. Jaimini also has the same theory, by the way. They also accept Pramanya Swatastva. Advaitin also accept Pramanya Swatastva. Visishtadvaitin also accepts Pramanya Swatastva. All of them accept that it is Antakarana Vritti. But Sakshi, Advaitins make out Sakshi to be an element or an aspect of Manas.
Correct.
Okay. On the other, or Manas with Antakarane Upadhikam, Brahman is Sakshi there.
Right.
But here it is not like that. It is Jiva himself, which is by intrinsically it is capable of discerning the valid from invalid.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for a nice explanation. I think today you tried to go deeper, and I hope the listeners are able to follow the track, because you're going very technical today in the basic, in the fundamental theory of perception, the instrument, the error, where the error comes, and how all that you beautifully explained. And I think you did put a very strong case for validity of the Sakshi as a concept. I think it's very nice, very nicely argued. It makes sense to know that somewhere you have to end the argument and say, yeah, this is what it is. Otherwise, it does lead to infinite regression. It's a very, very right way of pointing out. I think you tried a lot to say that it's not just a matter of convenience to end the argument. It's more to a positive affirmation of validity of knowledge. And Jayatheertharu's quote that it's normal. Normally, we know it's right, so we don't need too much of analysis because of sort of Pramana. And only when the departure happens, you need a lot more investigation, and then it automatically gets negated. Is a very powerful argument. But the couple of things I want to leave with you, which you can perhaps think through for next conversation. One is your argument that Advaita does not accept Sakshi in partially as a validation thing, Atma, Pramana, whatever you said, but it does not go into self-reflective because that is a weakness. You missed the bus is the quote you mentioned in your slide. I feel Advaita does not go there because it is not required for Advaita. When the day-to-day experience is very relative, subjective reality, it is not going to stand the test of time or cross-referencing for somebody else. Yeah, what is there to go further on that? So they sidestep the issue because it's irrelevant. It's a don't care.
No, it is not. So
let me put it this way: you can defend it next time. Sure. I think they're treating most of the waking state experience as a Boolean don't care condition, and therefore we don't have to explain, right? Because your experience get negated by my experience. My own experience get negated after some time. So what's the big deal? That is one thing. I want you to address the next conversation. Sure. They don't go there because they don't have to go there. You have to go there because for you, everything is real. Even the mistaken notion is real, and therefore you have to defend it. That is why Acharya went there. That is my argument. It does not weaken Advaita position at all because it is not the game they're playing. They are playing American football, not the British football. That is my argument. Okay. That is one. You may address it next time. Yeah. Another point I wanted to leave it with you is that why Srimad Acharya has not spent so much time explaining all the things you are talking about. I don't find in.
It is there in his Anuvyakhyana. It is there in Brihadaranyaka Bhashya. It is there in many places, sir. You have to just.
Here is my problem with when, of course, I know the answer. You would say
without Nyaya Sudha, his own words, they are there for this.
Okay. Here is my point to you. I know your response too. You would say you have to sit in front of a scholar and learn is what you would say. But for me, what I'm trying to say is that when any philosopher tries to introduce a path-breaking concept, which is define his philosophy, should he not write a separate book on this, small little booklet on? Why break it into bits and pieces, a little bit in Vishnu Tattva, something in Anuvakyana, something in Tatparya, something in Sutra Bhashya? Why? So we are not able to. So what happens is that the question which we need to answer is when Jayatheertharu explains in a very detailed way the relevance of Sakshi as a validating principle, Swata Pramanyata, and every other nice things which you said, in a very logical argument.
Why did Acharya do that?
No, I didn't go there. I'm going much worse, I'm asking. Is he peddling his own theory? Or is he validating Acharya's? That I don't know. The argument, I mean, in traditional circles, I am told, oh, no, because they are 100 years apart, nearly, right? So how does he know? How does he know that this is what Acharya thought in the absence of detailed booklet from Acharya on this? How does he know that? And the traditional story that whenever Acharya was treating Jayatheertharu was there as an ox carrying his books is not. I don't accept.
No, you don't need any of those things, sir. It is there in Gita Tatpanya. Acharya has used precisely these words. His arguments are, see, our problem is that, when you are used to a Shankara or a Ramanuja or, Kumarila, you have, lots of text which are, self-explanatory. So that is different in Acharya's case. He is very, 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 very pithy and, he is not given to words. And so, but he still shows his concern to communicate the right thing. And therefore, it is there in all the places where it is relevant. For example, in Gita 13th chapter, right? Shankara builds a big story to say why Ichcha, Dvesha and all these things are limited to the Kshetra, which is basically the Prakriti. Acharya says all of that is invalidated by Lord's statement elsewhere in the same chapter, and he says that all of that is against Sakshi, and there he gives all these things. So what Jayatheertharu has done is that he has taken these key portions and then he has elaborated on them. He has filled in arguments for us to understand rather than for he's not adding anything new to the core thought. If you read those portions, I mean, it will be evident. Otherwise, it will be.
I agree. Here is my request to you. Therefore, would you take some pains yourself or with your team to collate various references which Acharya makes in multiple books, put together in 1 or 2 pages to show it is not the introduction from Jayatheertharu, but his own argument is this. Would you be able to do that? That will be very helpful for the audience. That is one
actually Tippanikaras like Raghavendra Swami and before him, Vasaraja and Vadaraj Swami, and their main one of their tasks is to do that only. Yes. They basically tell how Jayatheertharu has not overstepped or sidestepped his predecessor.
Kindly bring it to the audience and in your side. The style is very good for English speaking people, English speaking Indians rather. It's very nice. So I would request you to do that. And I leave another thought with you.
Go ahead.
The first thing in the last stages, your concluding point, you mentioned that for Advaitin, Brahman knows, but in our case, even Jiva knows because of the Sakshi is what you're saying. You are ignoring a point there. From Advaita point of view, there's no difference between Jiva or Brahman. Jiva Brahman vinapara. That being the case, your argument
that is in the final analysis, right?
Yeah.
That is in the final analysis, they are not different. Right now, I mean, even if you take Shankaracharya's Viveka Chudamani, he criticizes the position that, people like us should not say I am Brahman or whatever it is. Ishvaroham. You don't say that, people like that he basically rebukes them.
Correct. He did. I mean,
so our position is that, whatever you are saying as a final analysis itself is apramanika. It doesn't have a pramana. That's the main idea there. But anyway, we'll come to that thing later. I get your question. Yeah. We will deal with it in the next session.
Because there is, in my view, at least in a limited sense, a valid criticism that Jayatheertharu rewrote Tattva Vaada. That is a valid criticism.
What's that? I couldn't hear that.
Jayatheertharu rewrote Tattva Vaada. There's a valid criticism on that because a lot of argument he puts for, you have to really look here and there to connect with Acharya, right? Maybe you are right. I mean, maybe you will be right because you are talking with authority. It will be very helpful for the audience if you can connect. Because it's very important. Because as you talk itself, I know where you're going, how you're building up. Once you establish Sakshi as the most relevant validation point, Swata Pramanita, once you give, then eventually you will get there saying that why Vishnu Tattva becomes so important. Otherwise, it is not Tom, Dick and Harry's Sakshi telling, right? There is, if this Swata Pramanita is valid for billions of people, it cannot be Tom, Dick and Harry telling that. There has to be a very great Antaryami who has got infinite capability, infinite intelligence, so that he is able to provide Swata Pramanita to every Jiva in the world. Therefore, you are leading up there, I can see pretty well. That's a good argument to make too. But let's present it to the audience, particularly who are looking for saying that, okay, these are all nice, but where does the Acharya say? Srimad Acharya say? He doesn't say so. They will run, at least, there are 100, 200 people who are already subscribing. They're going through, some people are asking questions. I expect it will grow further and further. Somebody will take the trouble of going